stuff like this should not happen because they give you the booklet that said, don't take this, 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 and this, the letter of the law. Do not take any of these things. And when you've been in the league this long, you know what it is.
He is 35, his numbers are dropping, and he can't stay healthy. This might be the beginning of the end. But can Podcast P actually bounce back from this? Let's break it down. On January 31st, 2026, the league came down hard on George, suspending him without pay for 25 games. It is his first strike under the current collective bargaining agreement. The penalty kicked in instantly, sidelining him for the Philadelphia 76ers matchup against the New Orleans Pelicans that very night. George isn't eligible to suit up again until March 25th, 2026, when they host the Chicago Bulls. By then, Philly will only have about 10 games left on the schedule. The league kept the specific substance private. George, however, didn't stay quiet. He released a statement claiming the failed test came from medication he took while trying to handle a mental health situation. He stated, "I have been vocal about mental health for years now. While treating a personal issue recently, I accidentally took a medication I shouldn't have. I own that mistake completely. I want to apologize to the Sixers, my teammates, and the city of Philadelphia for this lapse in judgment. My goal now is to use this time away to get my mind and body right so I can help us make a run when I get back." Shams Charania at ESPN circulated the statement, but the hit to George's wallet is massive. He is forfeiting roughly $11,740,000 in salary on his $51.7 million deal. That is a loss of about $469,692 every single game. That is more money than a lot of guys earn in a full season. It is more than some earn in a lifetime. The silver lining for the team is that under the CBA, only half that lost salary counts toward the luxury tax. That saves the 76ers about $5.87 million in tax penalties, which might let them duck under the tax apron with just a few small moves. George has only suited up for about 27 games this year. He is putting up 16.2 points, 5.2 boards, and roughly 3.9 assists a night. Those stats are a significant drop-off from his prime. The scoring dip is especially glaring compared to the years he was dropping 20-plus in his sleep. And the timing? Terrible. Philly is in a dogfight for playoff positioning. They are already banged up. The East is stacked, and now they are down a star starter for 25 contests. The Inside the NBA crew didn't hold back. Shaq and the guys basically said there is no excuse for a veteran to make a mistake like this. The conversation shifted between the seriousness of mental health and how much this hurts the franchise. Philly fans are understandably heated. It is just another letdown in a frustrating year. The Sixers have been battling injuries and inconsistency since day one. This suspension just piles more wreckage onto the fire. It has also triggered a debate about the league's drug policy and how it handles mental health meds. People are asking why therapeutic exemptions weren't in play here. Players can file for those exemptions, but it looks like George didn't have the paperwork for whatever he took. He has a clean record regarding drug suspensions until now. It is his first offense, sure, but at 35 with his window closing, this is the worst possible moment. The real question is, can the 76ers salvage this season? What is the long-term play for George in Philly? And how much does this tarnish his legacy? It all comes down to a few variables. You have to look at his age, the massive contract, the dip in production, the injuries, and now this ban. As for the immediate impact on the court, the Sixers are already treading water, trying to keep a roster afloat that has been decimated by injuries throughout the 2025-2026 season. Losing Paul George for 25 games is a haymaker to the jaw. It threatens their title hopes and forces the front office to face a harsh reality they didn't expect when they brought the 9-time All-Star on board. The numbers paint a bleak picture. With George playing, the Sixers hold a defensive rating of 110.1. That reflects the elite two-way presence he has always been known for. Take him out, and that rating slips to 114.9. That 4.8 gap is massive. It is the difference between a lockdown defense and a turnstile that opponents can abuse. His length, his ability to switch everything, and his knack for getting in passing lanes are gone for the next 25 games. On the other end, you are losing 16 points, 5 rebounds, and nearly 4 assists. It might not look like his MVP caliber years, but that production is vital for taking the heat off Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey. Without George as a threat, defenses can just load up on the Sixers' top 2 guys, making every possession a grind. Nick Nurse has a nightmare ahead of him trying to fix the rotation. He is going to have to lean heavily on guys like Kelly Oubre Jr., Caleb Martin, and some rookies. That creates a domino effect that messes up the chemistry they spent months building. Someone has to eat those minutes. Role players who were comfortable in their spots are now being asked to do way too much. Nurse admitted he was disappointed but gave the standard next man up speech. He talked about pulling our socks up and guys stepping into the spotlight. That is classic coach speak to project stability while privately knowing they are in deep trouble. Nurse hinted this might not change their trade deadline strategy much, leaving that headache to Daryl Morey. The Sixers are currently 26-21, sitting at 6th in the East. That sounds okay until you look closer. They are only one game ahead of teams like the Orlando Magic and Miami Heat. In a conference where tiebreakers determine everything, every game George misses is critical. They have played without him before, going 10-10. Playing 500 ball says they can survive, but survival isn't the goal for a team that wants a ring. Just treading water won't work when you are fighting for home court advantage or trying to avoid a bad first-round matchup. However, the money situation gives the front office a weird advantage. The suspension hands them a $5.87 million tax credit, dropping their bill from $7 million down to $1.3 million. That completely flips the script for the February 5th trade deadline. Before this, Philly had to dump salary just to get under the tax line. Now, the math has changed. Instead of trading valuable guys like Oubre or Quentin Grimes to save money, they can move smaller contracts like Eric Gordon or Andre Drummond. That financial breathing room opens doors that were closed yesterday. After George sits for 5 games, they can move him to the suspended list, which frees up a roster spot. That means they can bring in fresh legs. The Sixers can use this chance to grab players who fit the specific holes George leaves behind. With the deadline just days away, Morey has to crunch the numbers fast and pick a direction. Does the front office hold the line and pray the current squad can survive the turbulence? Do they go all in, hunting for upgrades to plug the massive hole George left behind? Or maybe they pivot, using the tax relief to make minor tweaks that bolster the bench without burning through future draft capital. Every option is a gamble. Standing pat means banking on internal growth and hoping George comes back ready to roll for the postseason push. Making a splashy move could mean mortgaging the future for a team that suddenly looks a lot shakier than it did last week. Conservative band-aids might not move the needle enough to make a dent come April and May. Plus, the locker room chemistry adds a whole new layer of drama to an already messy situation. Guys build real emotional equity with each other. That bond is forged in the fire of an 82-game grind and the pressure cooker of playoff prep. Losing George rips a veteran voice right out of the room. You're losing a guy who's been to the mountaintop of playoff basketball and knows how to steady the ship when things get tight. How the rest of the roster reacts to this gut punch will define their backbone and probably their season. Some squads fold when the heat gets turned up. Others find that extra gear and resilience they didn't know they had. The Sixers' response over the next 25 games is going to tell us exactly who they are. The NBA calendar doesn't care about your drama. The games keep coming regardless of who's in uniform. Opposing teams don't feel bad for you. They smell blood and want that win for their own seeding and careers. Philly has to figure out how to scrape out wins without one of their heavy hitters, facing opponents who won't show an ounce of mercy. Looking past the immediate headache of this season, Paul George's suspension hangs like a dark cloud over the Sixers' long-term blueprint, throwing a wrench into roster construction for years down the road. The fallout goes way deeper than the 25 games he's sitting out. It touches every part of the franchise's strategy to capitalize on the championship window with Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey. George is locked into a massive 4-year, $212 million deal that tethers him to Philadelphia through the 2027-2028 season. His paycheck for the 2026-2027 campaign hits a staggering $54.1 million, with a $56.6 million player option waiting at the finish line. That is a colossal financial anchor for a guy who just blew out 35 candles and now has the baggage of a suspension on his resume. His age is the elephant in the room for any long-term forecast. At 35, he's entering that gray area of an NBA career where you can't ignore the questions about holding up physically as he creeps toward 40. That athletic drop-off comes for everyone eventually, no matter how talented or hardworking they are. Father Time has never lost a match in pro sports. This suspension likely tanks his trade value if Philly ever thought about moving their expensive wing. Front offices are already skittish about taking on max contracts for guys in their mid-30s. Toss a violation into the mix, and George becomes an incredibly tough sell. You're looking at a trifecta of age, massive salary, and disciplinary issues that creates a perfect storm for destroying market value. The Sixers are stuck between a rock and a hard place when it comes to building around their stars. Embiid is always dealing with his own health questions. Maxey is the future, but he needs the right supporting cast to really shine. George was brought in to be that third pillar that vaulted Philly into legit title contention. Instead, he's turned into a giant question mark and a distraction. You can't have roster stability when your key guys are unreliable. The struggle to keep things consistent isn't just about box scores. It's about trust and dependability. Can the franchise count on George to suit up when the chips are down? His injury rap sheet already had people worried. This suspension just cranks that anxiety up to an 11. The mental health angle of George's situation adds another layer of nuance to how the organization handles him from here on out. Obviously, the Sixers want to support their guy in getting whatever help he needs, but they also have to put guardrails in place to make sure this doesn't happen again. It's a tightrope walk between looking out for the player and protecting the franchise. Future negotiations, whether it's extensions for others or restructuring George's deal, have to factor this mess in. How does this wreck the team's cap sheet long term? What if George's play falls off a cliff and he becomes unplayable while making superstar money? These were non-issues before January 31st, 2026. Now, they're the only questions that matter. And you can't ignore the hit to the fan base's morale. Philly fans have been through the ringer, trusting the process for years, only to see title hopes dashed by injuries, bad roster moves, or playoff chokes. George was billed as the final piece of the puzzle. Instead, he's just another headache for a fan base that's completely tapped out on patience. The pundits aren't sugarcoating it either. There's no positive spin for George or the team's outlook here. The Sixers bet the farm on George being their ticket to the finals. That investment looks a whole lot shakier now than it did when the ink was drying on the contract. The front office has some brutal decisions to make. Do they keep treating him as a cornerstone, or do they view him as a distressed asset they need to dump the second they get a chance? Neither path looks good. Keeping him means doubling down on a 35-year-old with baggage. Trading him probably means getting pennies on the dollar. Any strategy past this season has to account for scenarios where George is missing, flaky, or just a shell of his former self. The Sixers can't just cross their fingers and assume he'll return to all-star form and carry them deep into June. They need a plan B, a plan C, and the flexibility to pivot on the fly. The locker room vibes carry over into future seasons, too. How do the young guns look at George now? Does this chip away at his authority as a veteran leader? Does it create a weird tension that lingers long after the suspension ends? These are the intangibles that kill teams in ways you don't see in the stat sheet. Philly's window with Embiid isn't open forever. Given the big man's injury history, the Sixers don't have the luxury of waiting out George's drama hoping for sunny days. Every single season is critical when your franchise player battles chronic health issues. George's suspension basically shortens that window by throwing a wrench into an already complex machine. The ripple effects hit every part of the operation: draft strategy, free agency targets, trade talks, cap management. All that math has to change now because of the George factor. This isn't just about missing games. It changes the entire trajectory of the franchise. Then there's the hit to Paul George's legacy. This suspension lands at the worst possible time, colliding with his physical decline and questions about his performance that were already swirling. The next few months are likely going to dictate how basketball history remembers one of the most talented two-way players of this era. Even before the news broke, George's numbers this season were already showing some worrying signs of regression. Putting up just 16 points a night through 27 games is a massive step back for a guy who used to drop 20-plus in his sleep. You can see the decline. That explosive athleticism that made him a nightmare to guard on the wing just isn't there anymore. The film doesn't lie. He's lost some of that vertical pop and isn't scoring with the same efficiency. It's the classic decline you see when a star player's physical prime is officially in the rearview mirror. With this suspension, George is capped at 37 games max, and that's assuming he suits up for every single matchup after he's cleared to return on March 25th, 2026. That is a tiny sample size to try and get anything going. It makes it nearly impossible to find a rhythm, build real chemistry with the squad, or hit that flow state you need to turn good players into greats during the postseason. George didn't mince words, calling this the absolute rock bottom of his career, especially coming off what he already admitted was a rough debut season in Philly. It's a perfect storm of bad luck, injuries, shaky performances, and now this ban. For a 35-year-old trying to prove he's still a top-tier talent, climbing out of this hole feels almost impossible. The fact that he blamed the violation on a mix-up with medication for his mental health shows there's a lot going on behind the scenes that could mess with his head and his game when he gets back on the court. This suspension is colliding with his knee rehab and all those load management restrictions, creating a tangled mess of physical and mental hurdles that could completely shatter his confidence on the floor. Some insiders are starting to wonder if the team might cut his minutes or even bring him off the bench just to keep him in one piece for the playoffs. The idea of one of the league's best wings playing a reserve role would have sounded insane just 2 years ago. But now, it's a genuine strategy the 76ers have to think about. Looking down the road, this mess could tank his trade value and make it a headache to fit him into long-term plans. Front offices were already wary of taking on massive contracts for aging stars, and this just gives them another excuse to steer clear of George's deal. When you mix the disciplinary issues with his injury history and sliding numbers, you get a resume that scares GMs to death. Teams are going to look at him as a high-risk gamble rather than a sure thing. We're watching a superstar potentially fade into a role player in real time, and every setback makes that shift look more likely. In a worst-case scenario, if he keeps struggling, we might see him hang it up way earlier than anyone expected back when he was dominating the league just a few seasons ago. How he plays post-suspension is make or break. If he comes back balling, he proves he's still got that all-star DNA and shuts up everyone who says he's washed. But if he keeps underperforming, that label past his prime is going to stick, and it'll tank his leverage in any future contract talks. This suspension puts a stain on his legacy that wasn't there before. The guy is a 9-time All-Star with a Hall of Fame resume, famously bouncing back from that horrific leg break. In 2014, he built a career people respected. This is his first drug-related strike, and it's just throwing gas on the fire for anyone looking to tear down his legacy. The critics are having a field day online, using this suspension to attack his mental toughness and recycling the old narratives about him ring-chasing and choking in the playoffs. All those playoff P-jokes from his postseason duds are getting a second wind. Fair or not, this suspension is now permanently etched into his story. Remember, this is a guy who was absolute elite with the Pacers, dragging that team to the Eastern Conference Finals and cementing himself as one of the best two-way players in the game. His run in Oklahoma City with Russ gave us some insane regular season highlights. But when April rolled around, they couldn't get it done. Then came the Clippers era huge championship hype with Kawhi that just flatlined. Now he's in Philly, and it feels like history is repeating itself. It's the same old story. Sky-high expectations followed by something injuries, bad fit, or now a suspension getting in the way of a ring. George has never lifted that Larry O'Brien trophy. For a player this good, that empty spot in the trophy case hurts his historical ranking. That said, his honesty about mental health adds a human layer to his legacy that goes beyond basketball. A strong finish could flip the script, turning this into a story about resilience and grit instead of just another disappointment. The book isn't closed yet. Since this incident is tied to mental health treatment, it might actually shape how he approaches wellness advocacy, potentially making his off-court impact even bigger while people debate his on-court worth. He has a chance to become a real leader for athletes dealing with these issues. But first, he has to show some fight, so this suspension doesn't become the sad final chapter of his career. The next 12 to 18 months are going to tell us if Paul George has a redemption arc in him, or if this suspension is just the accelerator on a steep decline. This isn't just business, it's personal. George is navigating one of the roughest patches of his life right now. When professional fallout meets private struggle, you have to look at the human being, not just the jersey number. A 25-game ban takes a huge chunk out of his season, but weirdly enough, it gives him a break. At 35, getting forced time off might actually help him sort out his body and mind. He basically said as much, claiming he plans to use this downtime to get himself into the best shape possible, mentally and physically. Losing about $1.7 million stings, sure, but with his career earnings and guaranteed money, he's not exactly going to the poorhouse. The man has made hundreds of millions. The fine is a heavy hit, but it's not life-altering for a guy in his tax bracket. The real pressure comes from the public eye. Having an incident tied to his mental health meds splashed all over the news just adds more weight to an already heavy load. Everything, his medical choices, his headspace, his stats, is being dissected by everyone with a Twitter account. Give him credit, though, he owned it immediately. Apologizing to the team and the fans without hesitation shows a level of maturity that might help cool down the backlash. No excuses, no finger-pointing. He stood up, said my bad, and took the hit. There's a tricky intersection here with his mental health advocacy. This whole situation highlights how messy it can be to seek treatment when you're in a high-stakes job like the NBA. People definitely see the irony getting suspended because of the treatment you're taking to fix your mental health. On the flip side, he gets to be a dad and a husband for a bit. The NBA grind usually swallows your whole life, so getting to spend real time with his wife Daniela and the kids is a rare silver lining. It's a chance to lean on his support system and find some stability while the storm blows over. He's not totally exiled. Either he can still use the team facility, so he's staying connected to the squad even if he can't suit up for games. Being allowed in the facility is huge. It lets him keep his rehab going and stay locked in with the squad, avoiding that total disconnect from the sport while he preps for his return. Looking ahead, this stumble might actually fuel his passion for mental health advocacy. Since he's already been real about his struggles, we could see him doubling down on therapy, tightening up his daily routine, or even spearheading new awareness campaigns. You know what they say, sometimes you have to hit rock bottom to really level up. This wake-up call should make him hyper-vigilant about what goes into his body, specifically regarding therapeutic use exemptions. The league has a system for this. Players can get a pass for banned substances if there's a legit medical reason. They just have to ask first. It seems George skipped that crucial step before taking the meds that landed him in hot water. Dealing with the public eye and all the online chatter about what exactly he took is a test of mental toughness that goes way deeper than just making shots. Social media turns the volume up on everything, building these massive echo chambers of hate and hype. That sort of noise is heavy for anyone, let alone a guy already working through mental health hurdles. When you zoom out, this suspension fits right into a long history of drug drama in the NBA. The league has come a long way in handling substance issues, shifting from the hammer-drop lifetime bans of the 80s to a mindset focused more on rehab today. A look at recent history shows just how that plays out. Back in January 2024, Cavs big man Tristan Thompson got slapped with a 25-game suspension after testing positive for ibutamoren and SARM LGD-433, both straight-up performance enhancers. Fast forward to February 2025, and Milwaukee's Bobby Portis Jr. caught a 25-game ban for tramadol. His agent tried to spin it as an honest mix-up, claiming he thought it was Toradol, which is legal. Digging into the archives, O.J. Mayo got booted from the league entirely in 2016. That was his second strike for a drug of abuse, resulting in a permanent ban. Tyreke Evans faced the same fate in 2019. Although he got reinstated in 2022, he never really managed to stick in the rotation again. Chris Anderson got the boot in 2006 for substance abuse, but fought his way back by 2008 to save his career. Then in 2019, we saw a wave of 25-game suspensions for PEDs, hitting guys like DeAndre Ayton, John Collins, and Wilson Chandler. Every single one of them appealed, blaming tainted supplements for the positive tests, but the league didn't budge on the penalties. What sets George's situation apart is the reasoning he explicitly tied the violation to mental health treatment, rather than trying to gain a competitive edge or just partying. That context changes the public perception, even if the punishment doesn't change. Still, this is a massive personal nadir, framed in his statement as a slip-up while he was vulnerable and seeking help. However, the way he owned the mistake with zero excuses shows real maturity, and that honesty could actually build deeper empathy in his personal life and relationships. Fans are quick to point out George's track record of bouncing back, especially his legendary return after that horrific leg injury during the 2014 Team USA scrimmage. That kind of grit suggests this suspension might end up strengthening his character arc rather than becoming a permanent stain. Paul George's story isn't over yet. At 35, sitting on a massive contract while dealing with dipping stats, injury red flags, and now a drug ban, his future is shakier than ever. Still, we've seen athletes climb out of deeper holes than this. Players have written redemption stories after setbacks more severe than this one. Whether this suspension marks the beginning of the end for Paul George's brilliant career, or simply another chapter in a life defined by overcoming obstacles remains to be seen. The answer is going to play out on the hardwood over the coming months and years, measured in minutes played and buckets made. For the moment, we're all just stuck in wait-and-see mode. Thanks for hanging out with us. If you want to catch another deep dive like this one, go ahead and click one of the boxes popping up on your screen right now.